What's up guys? I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Force, I'm going to show you how to generate a PDF from a Lightning Web Component. Alright guys, so before we get started in this video, I want to remind you to make sure to go vote on next week's video. If you want to say in what I create for next week, you can head on over to the community tab of this YouTube channel and vote away. There's a bunch of options. You get to make the choice. So, go make it. Maybe, if you like this video anyway. Okay, so now that that's over, let me do what I always do at the beginning of these videos and explain why you would care to do what I am teaching you how to do, or showing you, or whatever. This one is a little bit more obvious than a lot of videos I do, but the reason that you would want to generate a PDF from a Lightning Web Component as opposed to, I don't know, maybe purchasing a managed package that literally does the exact same thing but for a lot more money and is honestly had a lot more time put into it, is because there's a lot of times where a business, that you're working for just needs to generate some one-off PDF, right? They don't need some all-encompassing tool like Conga Composer or, whatever else, DocGen. They just need to generate a PDF. Maybe that PDF is just a list of opportunities. Maybe that, PDF is a product catalog. I don't really know. I've had to do it a bunch of times, and there's plenty of good use cases out there. So while there's managed packages, they do cost a lot of money, and sometimes it's really not at all needed to purchase them. So cool, we've gone over that. Now let's go over how we actually put this thing into action. So thankfully, this is actually pretty easy, guys. This is not as complicated as you might think, but you do have to kind of know a handful of things that are not necessarily simple for the setup, right? Just they're JavaScript concepts that, I don't know, I guess they're a little more challenging, kind of, or less known. I don't know that they're challenging. I'm getting off on a side rant here, not super important. Anyway, the first thing that we're going to do, I'll put a link to this in the description, is head on over to the jsPDF JavaScript library. This is a great open source, completely free JavaScript library that can generate PDFs. And it can do tons of things. I mean, if you can think it, it can probably do it. You want encryption, it'll do encryption for you. If you want tables, it'll build tables. If you want circles drawn, you can technically even draw circles. It's a lot of things. So great library, and it is completely Locker service compliant. No need to even worry about that at all. So what do you do to actually put this in your org? Well, the first thing you'll do, obviously, is come over here to the GitHub, and there is a URL to grab the code. So I've already got it open, but you'd grab that URL, drop it in here, load the same thing, and here you go. This is what you'll need. You'll need to take this code and put it into a static resource in your org. So you've got two ways of doing that. You could Control-A, Control-C, copy this, and bring it on over to IntelliJ, create a new static resource. Or if you're not an IDE person, whether it's Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ that you're using, or whatever else, Welcome Suite, I don't know, you can always just right-click, save this as, the file it is, that JavaScript file. Head on over to static resources in your org. So you can get here from configuration to create a new static resource, and it'll allow you to upload that JavaScript file that you would have downloaded. Make sure that you change this cache control to public though. That's important. Okay, so if you were not doing it the configuration way and uploading a static resource, you would come on over here to IntelliJ, right-click on static resources for your org here, create new static resource, and name it whatever you want. Make sure the cast control is public, like I said before. Make sure it's an application type of JavaScript. Hit OK, save it, it'll save right to your org. You can do the exact same thing from Visual Studio Code. Just do Control-Shift-P to create a static resource, and you should be good to go. Once you've created a static resource, you'll be able to view it and check it out in either editor. By the way, if you don't know what this is IntelliJ, and with the Illuminated Cloud 2 plugin. If you don't know about it, I've got a tutorial that will help you set it up. I'll, probably put a pop-up around now for you to go check it out if you're interested. Okay, cool. So, what do we do now? We've got jsPDF. We know what we're going to use, the library we're going to use to generate the PDFs. How do we actually generate the PDF, though? So I'm just going to actually do a live example for this one. And we'll call this jsPDF demo or something. That should work. And we'll want to make sure that this is exposed. Now, if you're building this in Visual Studio Code, you're not going to see these checkboxes that make things easier, but that's okay. I'm going to show you in just a bit what you would do in Visual Studio Code to make sure it's exposed. All right. So we've got our Lightning Web Component set up. I'm going to do just a couple things to make everybody's life easier. Basically, all I'm going to do for this very simple demo is create a button that will allow me to generate a PDF. So I'm just going to drop this Lightning button in here. Basically, what it's doing is it's saying when I get clicked, I need to call the generate data method in my JavaScript controller, which we have yet to make. So don't worry if that's a little confusing. I'll show you in a bit. And I'm setting the label for the button to the words generate PDF. The second thing we're going to do is go over here to the metadata area and make sure that the right things are in the metadata. So you'll want to make sure that is exposed is in your metadata and it's set to true. Okay, that's important, or you can't use it most places. And then we want some targets, and we specifically want the lightning _ record page to be a target that's accessible. So what does this mean? Eventually we're going to drop this onto a Lightning App Builder layout, which we'll see closer to the end of the video. But if we didn't put these targets on here and make this exposed, then you wouldn't be able to do that. So these are pretty important things. If you're not aware of them, this is how you get a Lightning Web Component to show up as a selectable option on a Lightning App Builder page. Anyway, now it's time for the fun stuff, the JavaScript. So let's go over here, and we're going to need to do a handful of things. The first thing that we're going to need to do is import the load script from the Lightning Platform Resource Loader. So we're going to obviously have to load this jsPDF script into our component somehow. And that load script will allow us to do it. Another thing that we're going to do is actually import the jsPDF from the resources. Oh wow, I definitely didn't do that right, but that's fine. So let me explain these two things, I suppose, a bit. So Salesforce has this, load script method available to you to load in a script to your Lightning Web Component. So that's what this is here. And the jsPDF here is basically a reference to that static resource that you actually just made, right? So this jsPDF static resource that we made just at the beginning of this tutorial. And every single time I load this thing, it freaks out for a second. There we go. Okay, so now that we have those two things imported, we obviously need a way we need to actually load them. So the first thing that we're going to do is use the rendered callback lifecycle hook. If you don't know what this is, basically when the component gets rendered into the page, this rendered callback method is automatically executed, right? So this method is automatically called, and you can, if you want more information on how these Lightning Web Component lifecycle hooks work, I will put a link in the description, but it's just as easy to Google Lightning Web Component lifecycle hooks. They're really important to know because they come in handy in a lot of different ways. Make your life quite a bit easier. So in this rendered callback, we're just going to basically load the script into the page, right? So I'm going to do that with a promise, and I typically load these scripts with a promise. You don't necessarily have to, but it allows you to kind of order them and to potentially make calls after you are done loading them. So, and I'll show you what I mean here in a bit. So basically what we're going to do is load our script in here. Now, I'm not going to do this because it's not necessary, but say you wanted to load scripts and you wanted to automatically, call something afterwards, you could do the .then method, and then you could call another function when these scripts were loaded. It would be something like that. And then you would call a method like, call me, bro. And put it in here. This .call me, bro. So it's pretty important. A lot of times when you load these scripts, you want to just automatically call a method to do whatever else you want to do in the page. So it's important to know. I'm not going to use that in this, but that is one of the number one reasons that I typically use this promise approach. Basically what this is saying, I promise to load all these scripts and then call another method when I'm done doing it. If you put that .then statement like I just had. Pretty cool. Anyway, let's move past that. After we get to that point, let's do the generate PDF method. So, in this method, we're basically going to actually generate the PDF using jsPDF. There's a couple things that we need to do. Well, there's one main thing that we need to do. This is the thing that's really confusing to most people, and why if you Google this, a lot of people just say jsPDF is not a locker service compliant thing, blah, 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 blah. But it's not true. You just kind of have to do a weird thing that, you might not know how to do, and that's cool. So basically what we're going to do is create a variable that is able to be destructured. That's what these parentheses or brackets mean, that you're creating a variable that can be destructured, which I'll go over here in a bit. And you need to do window.jspdf. Okay, two super weird things that if you don't know a lot about JavaScript would be really confusing. So basically right here I'm declaring a variable that will not change. So basically all const means is that it's like a final variable in in other languages. Basically, once you declare it, you can't change it. Good to know. So I'm saying I want this jsPDF variable to be equal to this jsPDF window object. And you have to use these brackets here because this is an object that needs to be destructured. And if you're not familiar with that, basically it allows you to unpack values from objects into a variable. And I won't waste too much time on that, but I'll give you a link to this, Mozilla documentation so that you can learn a bit more about it, because it is important. And there are a lot of libraries that exist that are actually Locker service compliant, and you just have to do something along these lines to get it to work. So, and then this window.jsPDF, this is it's basically a global variable that the jsPDF library gives you access to through the window. I don't want to show you how that looks within this code because it's pretty ugly, but it's effectively the same thing as what I'm doing here. I mean, they do it a bit different in their code, but it's this idea. If you want to set a window variable and make it accessible everywhere, you can create this window.currentUser. And then if I imported this jsPDF2 script into my Lightning Web Component, I could say window.currentUser, and it would output John for me, right? So this window.jsPDF is outputting the JSPDF, object that represents all the functions and junk that it can do. Cool. So just this line right here, this is super important. If you don't have it, nothing else is going to work. And this is where basically, I would say 90% of people that try to do this, it seems, fail because they don't know that you can do this. So look out for that, especially when you're loading stuff from other libraries and you seem to not be able to get things to work. It's not always the case that you can do this, but I've been able to do it a handful of times. Okay, cool. Now that we've gone over those fun things, let's actually create a PDF to prove that this actually works. So we're going to create another constant called document, and we'll make it equal to a new jsPDF. And what we do from there is really up to you. You can just kind of leave it as it is, or you can do lots of other crazy things. So just for the purposes of this example, really, I'm going to put in encryption, right? So you can actually in jsPDF set up your own encryption. Obviously, you'd probably want to pull some of this data from like the server or from an Apex class or something as far as what the password should be for your encryption. These are just simple examples that jsPDF gives you, and I'm going to show you just to show you that it can do a lot. And then I'll just really quickly give you a simple example on how to generate text. So you can generate text blocks and kind of, determine where they show up on the page, I suppose. So if I wanted something like, "Hi, I'm Matt," sorry, to show up on the page, then I'd put that text in there, and then you'd put the coordinates in. So we'll say, 20 pixels on X, 20 on Y, and go from there. You can also change your, what these XY values are within this jsPDF. You can change it to points, pixels, and a handful of other things. Anyway, the other thing that I'll want to do is create a table just to show you guys that it's pretty easy to create a table, and then, you know, kind of do whatever it is you want to do with it. But I need to make one other method first, because I'm actually going to pull in contact data from my org to display to you. So before we finish filling out this doc table method, I'm going to create another method. But real quick, let's just create the save method. So we'll say doc save, and we'll save it as, you know, you can obviously save this as whatever you want, demo.pdf. Cool. So let's figure out how to generate a table full of contact data. It's very, very easy, thankfully. Super simple. What we're going to do is create that generate data method that we talked about in the beginning, and I can't spell. And it is going to call this PDF generator class to basically just get controller contacts. So if we go back up here, the first thing that we'll need to do is import that Apex class that I just briefly showed you, called get, and let's see, so we'll call it get contacts from at Salesforce Apex PDF generator dot get contacts. Cool. So basically what this does is it allows me to access this method within the PDF generator class. And as you can see, this is a pretty simple method. I literally just grab all the contacts in my org. So down here in the generate data, we're going to call that Apex method and grab the data and assign it to a variable. So we're going to want to actually create one variable called contact list. That works. And we'll make it an array because it's going to return a list of contacts. So that makes sense, right? So we'll call the get contacts method, and then we'll say then result. We'll say this dot contact list equals result. Okay, so well, and then after that we'll say this dot generate, not that, not going to call the same method again, generate PDF. So okay, if you don't know a lot about how this works, we're saying let's call that method in the Apex controller, and then when that, you know, method in the Apex controller is done executing, let's execute this code within here. And the result is equivalent to the return value from the method in that class. So in our case, that's a list of contacts. So this result variable here is equivalent to the list of contacts that gets returned from the controller. And then once we've got that contact list, we're going to generate the PDF. Awesome. And it's important that you do it in this order, because, you know, if you call the generate PDF method and tried to generate the PDF, or sorry, then tried to call this is technically asynchronous, this then statement. So it's going to wait. So just know that if this is waiting, like if you called this from here, say you were calling it when you're generating the table, this generate data method, and then just having it, say for instance, return the result, that could be, and honestly would be, detrimental, because this would just push past before this method within here actually executed, and it's a whole thing. But anyway, just note that the order that I'm calling these methods in is pretty important. Otherwise, you know, you could have issues with your table not showing up, or things not saving, or whatever else. It's just important to know that then is an asynchronous thing, technically. If you don't know what asynchronous is, definitely look that up. It's very important for JavaScript, super important for Apex, just important in general. Yeah. Okay, so we have our contacts that we've got. We've assigned them to this variable. I talked to you about a bunch of stuff you didn't really care about, maybe. And once we've got that information from the controller, we're going to go on ahead and generate the PDF. But first, we need to actually generate this table that we're building. And I just kind of want to show you this just because of how super easy it is. So we're going to put in its dimension, or where it's going to exist on the PDF. So 30 pixels down, 30 pixels in. That's just arbitrary. You can do whatever you want with that when you're designing your PDF. No. And then you're going to put in the data. So in our case, that's the contact list. And then we're going to need to make another variable called headers. So basically, this is going to be the headers for the table. We have yet to make this variable, so give me a second and we'll get there. And to simplify this, we're going to go on ahead and set the auto size of this table to true. You can do an enormous amount with these tables. I am doing a simple one just to show you the ease of it all, but you can do a ton more. I'm going to create this dot headers. Oh wow, what am I doing? I'm just going to create headers and make it equal to another function that I have yet to create. Create this dot create headers, and just going to I need to make this an array of headers, and we'll put in the ID, the first name, and the last name. Okay, if that doesn't make sense, let me just quickly explain. Basically, I'm making an array, or passing an array to this create headers method that I haven't showed you yet. I'll show you in a bit. And it's just creating headers for the fields that I'm actually grabbing from the contacts. You could do this a different way, make it a lot more dynamic, but yeah. I am going to just copy this method over here to simplify things a bit. But basically, this create headers method, all it's going to do, and really these should be lets. All it's going to do is basically generate an array that the table wants for its header. So these are all the different things that you can set for your headers for your table. There's actually, I think, a handful of other things you can set too. But basically, I'm just giving I'm just taking this array of keys, the ID, the first name, the last name, the names of the headers, and I'm generating the object, really, that I'm losing my words here. I'm generating the object that the jsPDF wants to see when it's, generating the table and looking for headers. Pretty simple. If you read the documentation for jsPDF, it goes over all this stuff, and I'll go back to it just to show you some other things here before the end of the video. Okay guys, so I made 3 errors while I was recording this and writing it live. So I figured instead of wasting time debugging them in front of you, I'll go back and show you what they were so that you can fix them if you're following live. First thing is, I put spaces here. You can't do that. It's looking for the keys of the, actual array. In this case, it's these two, first name, last name. So if I put a space between first and last name and I come down here and I actually create these keys, it's not going to work very well, at least the way that I'm building this currently. It's not going to work very well. You can do this in a much better way than I'm doing it, so that you can actually have column names that aren't your, API names. But for this example, I screwed that up, and it's important that the I believe it's the ID element actually equates to what is in your list that you're generating, right? The actual names of the fields. Okay, the second thing I did for some weird reason is I put load script. Whoop. Yeah. For some reason I did this, which makes no sense. Not sure why my head just went on ahead and did that. But you don't need to do that, and you shouldn't. So I just went on ahead and removed that. And the third and the last thing that I did is, for some reason, and I'm sure there's a good one, but I can't seem to remember it at the moment, is is you need to name this variable jsPDF like that. Otherwise this will break, and I'll just show you that real quick. If I change this to jsPDF and I come over here to this page where I've placed the generate PDF button, which I'll show you how to do in just a second, it just kind of freaks out when I press it, and it tells you that jsPDF is not a constructor because in the library it's not, the correct capitalization of it. But if you come back over here and you change this to all caps, you'll be good to go. And if we reload this and try to generate our PDF, you can see that it generates. It's got the encryption thing that we added in here, and it's got the stuff that we wanted. So real quick, I didn't show you guys how to put this on a Lightning page, but if we do that real quick, we can go to, you can go to whatever object it is, look at a record, and click Edit Page. You can also go to Setup and type in Lightning App Builder, find it that way. And we created the jsPDF demo Lightning web component. I'll just remove this temporarily, but I'm just going to drag that and drop it right over here on the page and save it. And once we're done, we'll go right back on over here, give that PDF generation a shot again. We can see that all that stuff worked, generated the PDF, and there we go. Cool. And that's really it. I mean, there's a ton more stuff you can do with this. And thankfully, Mr. Rio, whatever his actual name is, has given you a bunch of stuff to kind of demo. So if you wanted to see, it can do images. Another really cool thing that it can do is where is it? Auto print. So, a lot of times I see that places want to be able to print something on a printer just automatically with the click of a button. You can do that with this. Also pretty cool. And there's a ton of other things. So you can pretty much make whatever PDF you want with this library. And you can feed real data into it, as I showed you just a bit ago. And it's pretty simple. You can add images, do whatever else you need to do. But yeah, hopefully this has helped. And you can make your own PDFs going forward. Yeah, that's it. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe. Don't forget to vote on next week's video. And other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.